I want to spend a few moments thinking about the Megillah, the scroll for Pesach. And the scroll is the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. And one might wonder, what is the form of the phrase Shir HaShirim, or Song of Songs? It's a way of describing a superlative. A synonym or a synonymous way of saying it would be the greatest song, the Song of Songs, the King of Kings, the Prince of Princes, and so on. So in what sense might the Song of Songs be the greatest song? And I want to think about that for a few minutes. As you may know, the Song of Songs is one of 5 Megillot. When we think of a Megillah, a scroll, we think of Esther, the book of Esther that we read on Purim. But in fact, we have 5 different Megillot. Interestingly, the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition differ in how those 5 books, 5 scrolls, are arrayed in the order of the books of the Hebrew Scriptures for the Jews, the Old Testament for Christians. The Old Testament thinks of these scrolls in terms of their place in history. Where might we position them in the unfolding of the historical process understood by the Bible? And to what can they be compared? So, for example, the book of Ruth is in the Christian Old Testament right after the book of Judges. The book of Judges is the 7th book of the Bible. Ruth comes 8. Why? Because the book of Ruth opens in the days that the judges judged. Where else would it be in Scripture than following the book of Judges, which talks about judges? The book of Lamentations, one of the 5 scrolls, follows the book of Jeremiah. Lamentation means crying, weeping. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet who is constantly complaining to God about his task. Where else would Lamentations go than right after Jeremiah? Ecclesiastes and the Song of Songs go in the Christian Old Testament with other wisdom literature. That makes a lot of sense. Ecclesiastes is a kind of skeptical pessimism. The book of Song of Songs might be understood as a way of getting to wisdom. The book of Esther, which deals with the exile, Mordecai and Esther in Persia. It follows in the Old Testament Ezra and Nehemiah, who live and write at the time of the exile. So there is a logic to the way in which Christians place these 5 scrolls, but the Jewish tradition does it differently. What we do is we organize the 5 scrolls calendarically, according to the calendar of the year. Song of Songs in the spring, Ruth in the early summer, Lamentations in the late summer, Ecclesiastes in the fall, Esther in the winter. Think about this. The way in which we do it is we array these books around the annual cycle of seasons. In other words, we have a parallel here to the 5 books of Moses. We read the 5 books of Moses every year, beginning at the beginning and ending at the end of the year. Like the Megillot, the 5 scrolls, the Chumash is done annually. Also, 5 books of Moses, 5 scrolls. So one could make an analogy between the 5 books of Moses and the scrolls. Or as we might want to put it, that the 5 Megillot are another source of wisdom comparable to, in another way, the 5 books of Moses. We begin the cycle of scrolls with the Song of Songs. If you're following my analogy, the Song of Songs is analogous to the book of Genesis, the first of the 5 books of Moses. When we say that Genesis is the first of the 5 books of Moses, we can understand first in at least 2 ways. Chronologically, we read it first. But first can also be understood as dealing with the fundamentals. This is not just when and in what order we read it, but what is its status? The book of Genesis lays down the basic axioms, assumptions of biblical religion. And I want to make a case that the Song of Songs is analogous to the book of Genesis, is that in that it too lays down fundamentals of Judaism, but in a different way and in a different manner. Perhaps in following what I'm saying here, you can see that I'm trying to raise the status, not only of the scrolls, but of the book of Song of Songs itself. Immediately, though, we're faced with a problem. Because the Song of Songs, read directly, innocently, is a series of erotic love poems that are suitable most of all for the barroom, for the tavern. Let's praise erotic love over a couple of drinks. Let's loosen ourselves up so that we can read this erotic love poetry together and think just about the wonders of love. Okay, so that if my claim about the fundamental nature of the book of Song of Songs has plausibility, it is immediately threatened by the very nature of the book itself. Rabbi Akiva, in the early centuries of the Common Era, came along and said the following: "Perish the thought that the Song of Songs book is not scriptural." You see what he's saying here? If it's suitable for the barroom, for the tavern, how can it be part of the Bible? Perish the thought that it's not suitable for Scripture. No person of Israel ever disputed the supreme value of the Song of Songs. The whole world, he goes on to say, is not worth the day on which the Song of Songs was given to the Jewish people. For all the Scriptures are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. Wow, what a reach. Can we justify it? The Song of Songs, therefore, has to be treated as an allegory, not in the plain meaning of the love of a young man for a young woman, but an allegory of the love of God for the Jewish people and the love reciprocally of the Jewish people for God. God, the allegory goes, through love, redeemed the people. The people, through love, followed God into the unknown. Namely, the book of Song of Songs is a poetic realization of, yes, passionate love, but love not between, the plain meaning of the text, a young man and a young woman, but an allegory for the love between God and the people. In other words, and here is an attempt to illustrate my claim that this book of the Song of Songs is equivalent in importance to the book of Genesis. Song of Songs reflects powerfully the covenant of love between God and the people. Not just the kind of love that we read earlier in our service from the V'ahavta, which, as I pointed out in my few introductory remarks, is all about action. Love expressed as following the mitzvot with intensity, with a recognition that it is grounded in our liberation from Egypt. This is a deeply emotional, deeply committed, even if I could say so, a deeply erotic love. The word erotic comes from the Greek word eros. And eros is understood as yearning. Eros is the desire to know, to understand, both intellectually and emotionally. In this sense, the Song of Songs expresses an erotic love both in terms of passion and in terms of yearning for the fullness of a relationship with God, searching for a durable commitment, a love that is fully shared and that is reciprocal. The climax of the book of Song of Songs comes in chapter 8, famously. You've all heard this line. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like the seal upon your hand. For love is as fierce as death. Passion is mighty as Sheol. Sheol is the grave. A blazing flame. Vast floods cannot quench love, nor rivers drown it. Think in terms of the history of the Jewish people as I read this again. All of these phrases are poetic allusions, assuming allegory, of the relationship through thick and thin between God and the people. Let me be a seal upon your heart, like the seal upon your hand. For love is as fierce as death, survives death. Passion, mighty as the grave. A blazing flame. Vast floods. Think of the meanings of flood. Vast floods cannot quench love, nor rivers drown it. What does this mean? Yes, death is certainly a powerful force that seems to sweep everything away. And none of us can ever evade or avoid it. I thought this morning, just sort of a gratuitous comment, Johann Sebastian Bach's great chorale, Alle Menschen müssen sterben. Every individual must die. But there is, according to the Song of Songs, something as strong and as forceful and as lasting and as durable as the passing away of everything, and that is love. Love is a flame that water cannot extinguish. Love is a flame for which the forces of nature and history cannot obliterate. A passionate commitment that can, and in fact has, outlived the passing away of all things, the changes, the dangers that inevitably happen in history. So according to the allegory, God's love for our people is stronger than the grave, stronger than the forces of anti-Semitism, stronger than the passing fads of the day, stronger than the attractions of assimilation, all of which have beset us over not just the decades, not just the centuries, but millennia. And here we are. And how would the author, the poet of the Song of Songs describe that? An ongoing and deep and durable and irreversible love between God and the people. A commitment, I might say, to that which lasts, that which is above and beyond the vicissitudes of the forces of history. Isn't that why we're here? That is, God's love for us and our love for God is stronger than the forces of corrosion and decay, stronger than death. Why then, we might ask, should we see this poem as an allegory of, on the surface, an erotic poem? Why not just say this straight out, as I have done in the last several minutes, wholly unpoetically? Why not just state it? And I think that the answer is something like the one that Gerson Cohen, who of blessed memory was the former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, in an interesting article on the Song of Songs wrote the following: "The Song of Songs' very daring vocabulary is best expressed, and was perhaps the only way of expressing what the Jew felt to be the holiest and loftiest dimension of our religion, the bond of love between God and his people. How else can we do it and reach the emotional depth of that reality in a language other than poetry?" In other words, only the heightened and intense language of poetry can capture the meaning of the covenant between God and the people. Therefore, I think a case can be made that the Song of Songs, parallel to the book of Genesis, is one of the foundations of our religion. The Song of Songs as the genesis of the scrolls, the essential root of our relationship with God.